Mini episode 1518 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FDH Lounge preview of the NFC South for 2022. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris here with my good buddy, fellow FDH Lounge original dignitary Chris Galloway. We are going through division by division, looking at all of the NFL this year in these different segments. I'm going to refer you back, if you're interested in our thoughts on a macro level, the beginning of our first segment on the AFC East. That is where we historically kind of get those notes in at the outset. And then from there, it's just a tight focus division by division, except when we take a stroll down a cul-de-sac, as we did for the NFC East. If you already checked that one out here, we strayed back to something we forgot about from the AFC North, of all places. But
well, you'll have that on trips, Rick.
Yes, you will. Hey, I always say it's the show where nothing is off topic, so we proved it in that one here. But for the rest of these ones, we are doing them more or less as billed. I guess we always have to say more or less on this program. But for the NFC South, our structure for this is Chris and I are going to react to something. This is a feature from Fantasy Football Draftology 2022, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. There is a segment in there, one run-on sentence for each team. And I have these in order of the way that I have picked the teams in each division here. So we go through, we do the whole run-on sentence gimmick here, and then Chris and I will react to all of this afterwards. So much like approximately 101% of the rest of the world, I have Tampa Bay in first place. For Tampa Bay, I have, even the Cowboys don't have 6 automatic division wins like the Bucs, but the non-divisional schedule is relatively brutal, and the defense has questions at the front and back. So while Todd Bowles inherits a better squad than most, the second Super Bowl in 3 years will not come easy. New Orleans. Now sans Breeze and Peyton, the Saints are the league's collapse candidate that weirdly enough nobody sees coming, as a cap-stretched team with holes in key positions and question marks at quarterback and coach will lead to the revival of the derisive nickname Aints. Atlanta. Marcus Mariota, especially behind that offensive line, equals tanking, especially with a defense drowning in weak sauce. Side note, it turns out now it may or may not be Mariota through the entirety of this season, but I would say my point still holds. Carolina, a roster thinner in star power than most, also has a quarterback room that the coaching staff and front office have openly disdained, but a soft schedule may keep this bad franchise from drafting as high as the talent levels might indicate. So again, Chris, you and I, in the course of doing this over the years, we've seen one-team divisions before, but I don't know that we've ever seen any that are quite on the level of what the 2022 NFC South is.
Yeah, it certainly is not the division it used to be.
No.
And maybe that speaks in some ways to the brilliance of Tom Brady by picking them.
Mm-hmm.
Walking from a career of particularly weak divisions, of teams that couldn't get their act together, now to one where, Drew Brees was washed up and gone and everybody else is trying to rebuild. Like you, I agree, Buccaneers with probably 11 wins. They're going to take a little step back this year. Mm-hmm. And the biggest reason for that is I don't care what he says in a press conference or whatnot. Tom Brady's already checked out. And we've seen it through this offseason. He retired, then he didn't retire, and it turns out he was going to go to Miami, become an owner/player/coach/whatever the hell he was going to be. That all blew up in his face. So he's come back. He insisted they get rid of Bruce Arians. So they did, because they were desperate to bring him back for one more year. He's already got his deal in his pocket for Fox. Fox isn't giving that deal if they think they've got to wait 2-3 or more years. I mean, I'm sorry. So I think we can all expect that based on this current Tom Brady we're seeing in terms of his unfocused nature, the loss of some talent, not to mention 3 starters on that offensive line, the Bucs aren't going to be what they were last year.
Right.
And they've lost some other talent. So I think they win 11 just because that division is so weak. They will lose that game at New Orleans, as is their tradition. So I disagree with you on 6 division wins all being automatic. And then I have the Saints in second place.
Okay.
Last year before he got hurt, Jameis Winston wasn't playing that badly. Now the question is, without Sean Payton, does he go back to being the Tampa Bay Jameis? Probably. To your point, they have holes all over the place. Alvin Kamara is probably going to miss some time this season with a suspension at some point.
Yep. And the cap problems. The cap has finally caught up to him.
Well, and the cap has caught up to him, but they still managed to sign a bunch of guys. I
Right.
mean, and they drafted well, I will say that.
Right.
But again, first-year players, as we frequently talk about. And something that you and I talked about off air, but, let's not pretend that Drew Brees and Sean Payton equals Jameis Winston and Dennis Allen. That's not the case.
They can cosplay, but I'm not sure why the rest of the world has agreed to accept that as being the actual thing. I just don't get it.
They are not just a complete void of talent roster, though. That's the other thing.
The roster
doesn't
doesn't
play
suck.
in that equally bad division with the others. So I think the Saints are going to finish up right about 9-8 and competing for a playoff spot, trying to eke in. But the Bucs will be a couple games better at 11-5. Maybe they get to 12-4. But honestly, I think the Bucs, with 3 offensive linemen now basically out, I think Tom Brady at 45 is going to be in for a rude awakening when he doesn't have stellar protection. And then the other 2, I've sort of gone back and forth. I really can't put my finger on who finishes 3rd or 4th. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
I think the Panthers probably finish slightly ahead of the Falcons, just because I think the Falcons will take a step back without Matt Ryan, and they haven't done enough. I mean, the defense is just I don't know what they're doing there.
Right.
You have a corner in Terrell who's solid, but nothing else there worth a damn. So I think last year to get 7 wins was actually a decent coaching job, but they still haven't fixed that offensive line. Mariota is not a world beater, and again, if it ends up being Ridder in the second half of the season, then you're to a rookie quarterback who's going to make mistakes all over the place.
Right.
So, and your top target is Kyle Pitts, a great young talent, but no Calvin Ridley to help out on the outside and stretch the field and get it open underneath for him. I just think they go backwards from 7 wins to probably 5. I think they're marching backwards. And then the Panthers. Look, Baker's going to look good at certain points, right? We both know this. The problem for him is that in Cleveland, Baker played behind a top 5 line. He's going to be playing behind a bottom 5 line in Carolina.
Right.
That line is not good. And I think that is going to be the biggest problem for him because he doesn't handle the rush well.
No.
And so it's possible that they get him rolling out a lot more now that he's healthy, and they try to use that to their advantage, knowing that they've got a bad O-line. And here's the newsflash for the rest of the league and the defensive coordinators. Baker likes to roll to his right.
Yeah. This is true.
There's your tendency.
Although Stefanski would roll him to the left sometimes too. Stefanski loves the left rollout.
Yeah, throw across the, throw in a way that doesn't ergonomically make sense.
Right.
So Baker, again, listen, I'm going to go out on the limb and I'm going to say the thing that nobody thinks is going to happen. I think the Browns go to Carolina and win week 1, and I think that's going to happen because that team, the Browns team, that defense, I think they want to break him in half, and I think there's 4 or 5 sacks in week 1. And Baker, when he's getting sacked, he doesn't play well. I think Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney are going to go after him like there's no business. And those corners know his tendencies. So
Yeah.
I think the Browns are going to win week 1. I know everybody else thinks it's the Baker revenge tour. The Browns are in chaos. They don't have Deshaun Watson. They're doomed. Baker's going to get his revenge. I don't see it. And plus, they just lost their field goal kicker for the year.
Yeah.
The former Brown Zane Gonzalez, who, again, we both know a kicker matters, right? Now you're 2 weeks from the season, and now you don't have a kicker.
Right.
So they're going to have to go out on the open market and find one of these, used up retreads, and that'll be a problem for them as the season goes on. So between Carolina and their problems and their depth issues, and could Christian McCaffrey stay healthy and stay on the field, we have no reason to believe that that's the case. I've got to think that he's going to miss at least 5 games, if not more, right? I mean, because he always does.
Yeah, you got to think so.
And so I think that kind of dooms them. So I think Carolina and Atlanta are just fighting to see who ends up in the cellar. And again, the Saints struggling to try to maybe get a wild card spot, with the Bucs just kind of stepping back on Tom's way out the door to 11-5, and before they have to start rebuilding next year when the cap crushes them and no more quarterback, and then they're staring into the abyss again as a franchise.
Yes, and you mentioned Atlanta and Calvin Ridley, that he committed what is the absolute cardinal sin in the eyes of the NFL. In the eyes of the NFL, apparently worse than sexually assaulting dozens of women, is associating with the league's official gambling partner at DraftKings. So he's going to sit out an entire season here. So that sucks for him. That sucks for any Calvin Ridley dynasty, fantasy owners, etc. So...
and let me just say this, because I've seen all this, you go on Twitter and everybody's like, it's all nonsense and this and that. The problem, of course, is that it's all about the contract and the union contract. And there's a segment in there that's explicit to gambling. And it's true, and it is its own section, and it is truly no tolerance. You do it in any way, and it's a year, and they've got that in place so that they just scare the hell out of these guys to avoid it. I know everybody's like, oh, they think, gambling's worse than sexual, misconduct. No, I don't think they really do. I think that they have it in the contracts, and that's why he's getting a year. So everybody's like, it's not fair, free Calvin Ridley. I'm like, well, the problem for him is that the section for nonviolent sexual misconduct is nebulous in the contract, as was pointed out by Sue Robinson. Not well defined. And so, whereas gambling is very explicitly defined in another section. So, I get it. It seems awkward and stupid and everything, but you had to know as a player, they've always maintained this position. It's been in the contract. They teach these guys, don't do it. Don't do it in any way, or you will lose a year. And he did. I mean, it's stupid.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not going to deny it's stupid. Or get a sock puppet to do the gambling for you, like everybody else in the world.
And I agree with you. I mean, it's like it was part of a parlay, and he bet for his team to win.
Right.
In a game he wasn't even playing in.
Right.
So, I mean, I agree with the whole element of, well, that's just dumb.
Right.
I mean, it's not like he was like, he knew something, and he's like, they're throwing the game, and I'm going to bet against the Falcons, and it was part of a parlay. He had a bunch of other things riding.
Right.
So he wasn't like loading up $1 million on the Falcons to lose because he knew something. And he bet for them to win because he believed in his teammates. So again, it's stupid, but he should have done it.
Well,
you have to know if you're an NFL player, don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's definitely the case. But again, I believe it's part of my profile that I'm going to smarmily seize on something like that when I see it.
Yes,
so,
I know. It is what you do best.
It is taking cheap shots here to make my point. But
it's kind of like so you heard in the media after the Deshaun Watson decision. They're like, see, the NFL agreed he committed sexual assault. I'm like, pause. The arbitrator, Sue Robinson, former federal judge, explicitly says in her ruling that she's going to have to accept what the NFL takes and defines as quote-unquote assault because they don't properly define it, and also it's not the same definition in terms of real-world legal definition of assault. So she uses the phrase, and she literally basically lays it out like, I'm using this word because this is how the NFL contract has it framed. But, again, it's the definition of assault is really only really defined that way in this contract. And also then she tacks on, and then there was no violence involved. So what do we, so anyway, again, it gets the details and all this stuff gets lost in the semantics of people wanting to just yell and say awful things and whatnot and say, see, he's guilty of sexual assault. It's like, careful. In real world legal terms, no, he's not. In terms of misconduct, yes. In terms of how the NFL defines things, she was forced to use that phraseology because that's how the contract frames it. So, again, I know nuance is lost in the Twitterverse, but...
Well, speaking of assault, I regard it as an assault on common sense for anyone to think about New Orleans, by the way. Love that segue. But for anybody to buy into the whole continuity con on New Orleans, I'm just going to say it again. I think it's a fraud situation there. I think, Dennis Allen, you look at what his record was in Oakland, so promoting him on the whole continuity fraud thing of oh, hey, we're going to have this coach and QB each cosplaying as the last guy, that kind of a thing. You and I bemoaned this off air, our beloved Ohio University Bobcats here. I said to you, how is it possible that 15 minutes after Frank Solich retired, it's like he was never there in the first place? Sometimes that happens in life. Now, I'm not saying that the Saints are going to regress to being the expansion team of 1967 or whatever, but I'm saying that, everybody's, looking at them like they're the Saints of the last 15 years. And I don't see it. It's just one of these things where, it's one of these sort of visual things that I can't think of the phraseology here because it's been a long day, but when everybody stares at a picture and only one person sees what's in there, I feel like I'm that one person that sees this, and the rest of the world's oh yes, it's still the Saints the way they were before, yada yada yada. But again, I just keep coming back to that because it's one of my biggest points of differentiation with everybody this year is I don't see it with New Orleans. They're the collapse candidate I keep saying that nobody sees coming.
Well, maybe they prove to be the new Coke of the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, I agree with you, right? And I think I mentioned that in my opening segment on this is that, they got holes. It's not Sean Payton. It's an unproven Dennis Allen. It's Jameis Winston and not Pro Bowl, Drew Brees. Now, granted, the last 2 years of Drew Brees were, dear God, he was washed. But most of that roster is still a holdover, right?
Right.
Minus a few guys because of the salary cap issues.
Right.
So at this point, it's not unreasonable for people to think, okay, we're going to the, this is the what's his face? Barry that replaced Jimmy Johnson. Why am I not thinking of his last name?
Oh, Switzer, yeah.
Yeah, Switzer. It's kind of like that, right? The team is the same.
Yeah.
And so the personnel is mostly the same, and they're going to run the same system under the OC. So you look at it and you go, okay, there's continuity. But as we saw with as you mentioned, beloved Ohio Bobcats, Solich retires late in the process, right before camp, so right at the end of July, and due to a health issue, and they immediately promote the offensive coordinator, saying continuity, and then they promptly go out and win 3 games. So, and they're terrible. So we'll see. I don't think the Saints are going to have that kind of dramatic drop off from bowl team to 3-win. But I do think that the idea that they're somehow going to excel with the current personnel situation, I don't agree with. Again, I think they're fighting to try to get into a wild card spot.
I'm going to compare this, and this is maybe an unfair comparison as far as the succeeding coach in the other scenario, because I don't necessarily know how much of that was his fault. I think there was a lot of things that went wrong. But for whatever reason, I'm getting vibes here of Joe Gibbs, Richie Pettibone. I'm just getting memories of that. He came in 93 He got promoted to head coach, and like I said, as I recall, maybe not all of it was his fault, but man, they went south in a hurry. I mean, that was like the death of the Redskins as we knew them. So I'm just getting the same vibe here. I don't know. It's just one of those things where, and when that happens, I think you'll agree with me on this part. When you get a negative snowball going, like you can tell me all you want about they've retained much of the talent of the last couple of years in different spots and everything like this, whatever. But like if a negative snowball starts rolling, they get off to like a 1-5 start, everything else goes right out the window. It's just going straight downhill.
Yeah, no, you're right. And look, each of us gets a gut call, right?
Yep.
This is your gut call.
My gut call.
Mine was the Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
That, maybe on paper it doesn't look like that adds up the way we think, but your gut is telling you the Saints are going to nosedive.
Yep.
The same way my gut was telling me the Vikings, it's not going to work out the way they thought, at least in year one.
Right.
So we're both making our gut call. Yours is simply the Saints, and mine's the Vikings.
Yep.
So.
And we'll see how it plays out, and both of us, unsurprisingly, saying the Bucs to win the division. And then, of course, a couple segments from now, once we go through our playoff picks, we'll see how far we have both of them going. But in the meantime, we've been breaking down the 2022 NFC South. Thank you, Chris Galloway, and thank you, everybody, for checking out this segment of the FDH Lounge.